Hi, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to you all. Thank you for being here with us. I'm Helen Nisbet. I'm the Artistic Director for Art Night. I began working with the Guerrilla Girls on this commission in 2019. The project has had to shift a lot, and I want to thank them in person here tonight for their wonderful temperaments, their intelligence, and their ideas. The final commission is better than I could ever have imagined it would be. It's also galvanized a nation. Much of this is also thanks to our partners, Dundee Contemporary Arts, Glasgow Women's Library, the Tetley, Compton Verney, Grand Union, Towner Eastbourne, Glenvivian Art Gallery, and G39, each of whom is hosting a billboard in their local area. So tonight, auto-generated closed captions are available. If you need them and would like to use them, you can enable them with the CC button at the bottom bar. So they don't come up automatically, you have to enable them yourselves. I'm gonna pass over to the Guerrilla Girls now, so they can tell you about the male braise and their wider work. So for the next 30 minutes or so, they'll be doing that. And then we'll end with around 30 minutes of preset questions by our partners. So everyone have fun, and I'll see you later.
What do art historians call the macho, hetero, predominantly white male perspective in European and American art that depicts women as sexual objects for the pleasure of male viewers? The male gaze. But the Guerrilla Girls call it the male graze. There are lots of naked women in post-colonial Western art, sleeping in the backyard, splayed out on beds, lounging around with their friends, bathing, dancing, hooking up, being harassed, abducted, bound, raped, and murdered. When we looked into how some revered male artists used and abused women in their real lives, we saw more than gazing, we saw grazing. So the question we want to ask is, does life imitate art or art imitate life? Gauguin abandoned his wife and 5 children to become primitive in the Caribbean and South Pacific. He married a succession of teenage girls as young as 13. He died of syphilis at 55 and probably gave it to many of them. European colonialism at its finest. Of the women who had long-term relationships with Picasso, 2 died by suicide, 2 had nervous breakdowns, and 1 escaped and wrote about it. In 1950, sculptor Dorothy Daner decided her husband, sculptor David Smith, had hit her once too often. She loaded her pickup truck and took off for New York to start a career of her own. Smith turned around and married one of his young students. According to the book 9th Street Women, Hans Hofmann's summer school in Provincetown was a harem, and Hoffman, the bull elephant who patted his female students on the ass and fucked everything that moved. Lucian Freud admitted to having 14 children by 12 different women. He may have fathered twice as many. He said women go downhill at the age of 16. Sir Lawrence Gowing, principal of the slave school, pimped for Freud, admitting young girls to the art school who had caught Freud's eye. Chuck Close invited his female students from Yale to his studio to sit for portraits. The ones who refused to undress were given $100 and told to leave. The ones who stayed endured prying questions about their sex lives while posing naked. Get ready for the male graze, the Guerrilla Girls' take on our culture's enduring love affair with bad male behavior in art.
Hi, everyone. I'm Frida Kahlo, and I'm here with my colleague, Katja Kolwitz, and we're both founding members of the Guerrilla Girls. We've been involved in just about everything the group has done.
We love doing this fierce, game-changing work about sexism, racism, and corruption in art, culture, and politics. We create political art that uses the persuasive strategies of advertising, shows people something they probably didn't know before, and has the power to change their minds.
We are thrilled to be here with you for the launch of Art Night 2021. Our new billboards and the Male Grays website are up and are active with tons of Instagram and Facebook comments. But first, a little bit about what it's like to be a Guerrilla Girl.
Imagine your women artists pissed off that almost all the opportunities in the art world go to white men. Imagine you go to a protest outside the Museum of Modern Art in New York after it opens an international exhibition in 1984 with 169 artists, but only 13 women, 6 artists of color. You see immediately that no museum goer even cares. That was your aha moment. We realized there had to be a better way, an in-your-face, unforgettable way to break through people's preconceptions and prove to them that the art world is not a meritocracy where museums, galleries, critics, and collectors always know best.
Imagine you dream up a new kind of street poster to wake people up to the pathetically low number of women and artists of color showed in galleries and museums. You call a meeting, you decide to be anonymous, and you name yourselves Guerrilla Girls. You pass the hat around to pay for printing. And within weeks, you're sneaking around New York in the middle of the night carrying stacks of posters and buckets of glue. And the work ignites a public debate about racism and sexism in the art world and beyond.
What follows? Hundreds of works, exhibitions, performances, workshops, street posters, books, not just about the lack of gender and ethnic diversity in art, but also in film, politics, pop culture. You get thousands upon thousands of messages from people all over the world, aged about 8 to 80, saying your crazy kind of activism is a model for them too.
Over 60 individuals become members of the Guerrilla Girls. Some stay for months, some for decades, and a few for just a single meeting. They're cis, lesbian, transgender, diverse in age, sexual orientation, socioeconomic class, and from many ethnic backgrounds: Asian, South Asian, African American, Latinx, European white, and so on. And each takes the name of a dead woman artist as a pseudonym.
From our beginning to today, we have fought against racism, sexism, museum corruption, income inequality, and sexual harassment and assault. And if you look at our latest book, The Art of Behaving Badly, these foundational issues come through loud and clear. So tonight, we're going to take you through a little bit of that trajectory, examples of our activist art, early and recent, organized by subject.
So let's start with anti-racism. Here is one of our first early intersectional posters from 1986. Only 4 commercial galleries in New York show Black women. Only one shows more than one.
This one is a perfect example of how we try to craft our work using disruptive headlines, in-your-face design, and killer statistics. We try to twist an issue around and present it in a way that hasn't been seen before. You know, if you look at this poster about how low auction sales prices were for women artists, this is 1989. Things are a little bit better today, but the top auction price for a living woman artist is still only 14% of the top price for a man. Jenny Saville, 12.4 million versus Jeff Koons, 91 million.
Now, this billboard appeared in Minneapolis in 2016 during the Oscars So White protest. The anatomically correct Oscar. He's white, like almost everyone else who wins. As usual, we had to back up this in-your-face headline with some very grim statistics.
Now, around the same time as the Anatomically Correct Oscar, we were working on a poster about US commemorative months and having a hard time with the word discrimination. It's so long, it's hard to put in a poster. When a light bulb went off in our brains, and this is a video that is now playing on the Sunset Strip in Hollywood, California, showing what we did. What we actually figured out was discrimination contains the word nation, which is so perfect for the United States and probably every other nation in the world.
And this past summer 2020, we did this video to honor the memory of all the Black lives destroyed by police violence in the United States.
Anti-sexism. The Guerrilla Girls formed to do street posters about the situation of women artists, and these are some of our earliest. We went after artists, museums, and galleries who participated in a rigged system.
And not long after these posters went up, the word on the street was that the Guerrilla Girls are so negative. So we decided to do a positive poster to make women artists feel better. And it was an overnight sensation. We're still getting letters from people all over the world in every walk of life telling us that this poster isn't just about the art world, it's the story of their lives too. No wonder it has been translated into over 20 languages, including Malayalam here in Kochi, India.
We've been confronting the film industry since around 1999. You know, Hollywood, of course, thinks it's liberal and progressive, but as this poster of ours from 2020 points out, women still have a better chance of becoming a US senator than a film director.
Museum corruption and income inequality. We love art and artists, but let's face it, the art system sucks. Of course, there are collectors, curators, historians, and museums who advocate for a different art world and collect all kinds of work by diverse artists. But the art world is also filled with poseurs, snobs, gamblers, smugglers, tax dodgers, insider traders, and even criminals. The art market is completely unregulated. In fact, it's been described as the 4th largest black market in the world, and that's after drugs, guns, and diamonds.
We did our first code of ethics for art museums in 1990, and most of the museum practices we complained about then are much worse today. So in 2019, we did a new code of ethics. This time we made it a monument that we think belongs outside every museum in the US for sure, and probably everywhere. We plan to construct a version of it on wheels and drag it around New York to all of the museums.
So here is our proposed code, written in slightly biblical language. If thou exhibit art, mostly by white males, bought by white males at the most expensive art galleries, then donated by wealthy white male collectors to museums, thou must rename it thyself the Museum of White Male Billionaire Art.
Thou shalt honor thine employees and pay all of them a living wage, plus health insurance.
Thou shalt show and collect lots of art by women and artists of color before they are dead or dying.
Thou shalt not permit billionaires who sell deadly addictive drugs, make tear gas, deny climate change, undermine elections, get rich off student debt in private prisons, to then art wash their reputations with huge donations and get their names on museum plazas.
And finally, if thou shalt admit that if your museum does not show art or hire staff as diverse as the culture you claim to represent, you're not showing the history of art. You're merely telling the story of wealth and power.
We look at it this way. If the wealthiest country in the world is stuck with a system where the only way to fund culture is with philanthropy from the super rich, then maybe museums should only accept money from people who make the world a better, not a worse place.
In 2015, we did a street campaign of stickers, billboards, and videos about art world income inequality. And then a stealth projection suddenly appeared on the facade of the Whitney Museum.
So the world of artists is great, but the art world sucks. The super rich are controlling the museums, sitting on the boards. Power is being centralized into these few rich people. Like it's really about the 1%.
Unfortunately, the art world right now appears to be about money and about the production of luxury items.
Billionaires are making more and more and more, and their taste controls which artists get the big bucks and get the opportunities and get the shows. We're planning to sneak around New York with the Illuminator. So we'll be starting out in Chelsea, and we hope to then go to the Whitney. So we had this idea to do something we could do really fast around New York and put these stickers up. Some of the stickers are about art galleries, about billionaires, billionaire collectors, and about museums. So we wanted to put them up where they belong, on the big galleries, on the museums, and give them out to people, especially so they could do the same thing. And it seemed like a great idea. Call the people together, just put the word out, see who comes, and just run around the streets and put these things up and bother people.
It's going to be a Saturday in Chelsea. People walking around, feeling really good about having seen all this inspiring art. And all of a sudden, they're going to see the wall above start talking to them. And it's going to say, "Dear art collector, we completely get it. Collecting art is so expensive. We really understand why you can't afford to pay all your employees a living wage." The wall is going to talk to them. Every time we put something up, people would go bananas. Some people would love it, some people would hate it. So we would sort of work in that space. It's really very productive to provoke people to think about things. And we discovered early on that if you could make someone who disagreed with you laugh, then you had a hook inside their brain. Once you were in there, you just might be able to change their minds about things.
And this brings us to why we're here tonight. What art historians call the male gaze, I can't even say gaze anymore. We call the male gaze. All those naked women in art museums all over the world, are they just luscious patterns of color and texture, or is there more going on? What are they doing? What is being done to them? Why are they naked?
Sexual exploitation, domination, abuse, and voyeurism are everywhere in our culture. And when these themes are aestheticized in art, why does the discussion stop there? The male gaze isn't about censoring artworks or condemning sexuality as immoral. It's about facing the fact that Western art is and has been obsessed with the female body, sex, and violence.
Okay, so you know the art, but do you know the artist? Lots of male artists have exploited and abused women in their real lives. Does that bad behavior find its way into their work? To have a deeper understanding of art in our culture, let's look at art and artists straight on. In the age of Me Too, let's face it, there is no going back.
Did Lucian Freud really do all of this? Hell yeah.
Had 14 children by 6 different women and was rumored to have had twice as many.
Never saw many of his children until he wanted them to model for him.
Painted at least 4 of his daughters naked, one at age 14.
Got furious when one daughter refused to let him paint her 6-year-old daughter naked.
Reconnected with an estranged son at a book launch, then asked if he could paint the son's wife naked.
Fathered 3 children by 3 different women, all in the same year.
Impregnated a 16-year-old.
And then said women go downhill after the age of 16.
Got Sir Lawrence Gowing, principal of the Slade School of Art, to admit young students he wanted to have sex with.
Had 4 children by a former student, never saw any of them, and wrote them out of his $162 million will.
Now, who was really shortlisted by the famous Turner Prize? Turner was a cheapskate all his life. He never paid housekeepers who lived with him, took care of him, had sex with him, and bore his children. Late in life, he freeloaded at a boarding house run by his mistress. When he died, he cut them all out of his will, including the children he had ignored, but he left a small fortune in unsold paintings to support impoverished artists and to keep his name alive. This became the oh so prestigious Turner Prize.
What did Picasso do after Françoise Gillot left him? Well, he didn't cry, but he refused to see their children, found himself an even younger woman, and then proceeded to ruin Gillot's art career by pressuring galleries to not show her work.
And these artists were said to be violent to their wives, but only one actually stood trial for her murder. So we have Pollock, de Kooning, Hopper, Smith, and of course, Carl Andre, who was tried and acquitted for murder.
You know, today, many individuals are bravely speaking out. And we've also heard rumors of discussions going on right now as we speak in museums over whether an artist's bad behavior should be disclosed in captions that explain his art. And we have some ideas about that.
Now, to set the stage, this is the official portrait of President Bill Clinton hanging in the National Portrait Gallery in Washington, D.C., painted by an artist who, like Clinton, has been accused of sexual abuse. What should the portrait gallery say about this interesting coincidence?
Well, we are offering them a couple ways out. 3 ways to write a wall label when the artist is a sexual predator.
Number 1, don't mention it at all. Chuck Close is one of the most important artists of his generation and the creator of a new kind of portraiture consisting of patterns of color.
Option number 2, mention it just a little bit. Chuck Close is one of the most important artists of his generation and the creator of a new kind of portraiture consisting of patterns of color. Like many artists, he has had a few disgruntled models and employees.
And then, of course, there's number 3, be straight up honest. Chuck Close has had a huge career with prices to match. He's been accused of sexually abusing models and students he picked up at fancy art schools. How fitting and ironic that he painted the official portrait of Bill Clinton. The art world tolerates abuse because it believes art is above it all, and the rules do not apply to genius white male artists. Wrong.
Okay, art school, art world, confidential. Young students, horny professors. Hooking up with students today is not okay, but we all know it still happens. And schools have been slow to respond to complaints and often negligent in meting out any kind of punishment.
So on the Male Grays website, we have a lot of stories to tell of art professors creating hostile conditions in class, preying on their young students to have sex with them, impregnating them, then keeping their professor jobs, but getting rid of any female faculty member who got in their way. Administrators also pimped for some of these male professors, paid for the silence of pregnant students, or just plain did nothing.
And it doesn't stop after art school. The art world is a hierarchy with mostly wealthy white men at the top who continue this bad behavior or look the other way when their colleagues engage in it.
What did the Museum of Modern Art do when it came out that its board president gave convicted pedophile Jeffrey Epstein $200 million and was then accused of sexual abuse himself?
Basically nothing. Leon Black, billionaire, big-time art collector, and owner of Phaidon Press, gave $40 million to the Museum of Modern Art. Despite all the dirt on him, this very day, he's still on the board, although no longer the president. There's still a gallery named after him, and he's still silent on his connections to Jeffrey Epstein.
And there's more. A young Russian single mother has claimed that Black trapped her for years in an abusive sexual relationship through manipulation, threats, and coercion. Black said it was consensual, and the money he lent her was to buy her silence. She says otherwise and is suing him for defamation. She also reported that Black sexually abused other women as well.
So we put this message to Black and Glenn Dubin, another Epstein pal on MoMA's board, on a phone booth just outside the entrance to the museum. And it says, advice to the Museum of Modern Art about big donors with big ties to Jeffrey Epstein. MoMA should kick Black and Dubin off its boards immediately, drape the Black and Dubin galleries in shrouds, and put up wall labels explaining why.
And of course, the Guerrilla Girls are happy to volunteer to help write those wall labels. And in terms of MoMA, it's the least they can do. Kicking him out is the least they can do for victims of sexual assault everywhere.
Now, on the male grays, we invite all of you to comment, to tell your stories, or to mend your bad ways with an apology.
When Art Night asked us to create a bunch of billboards in 11 UK cities, we decided to ask all of you out there to help us wherever you live. We're asking you to go to your favorite museum, count the number of naked women in the artworks versus the number of women artists on the walls.
Tally up your results, post them on themalegrays.com for everyone to see and also to think about. We promise that this will change the way we all look at art forever.
And now it's time for everyone to speak up. We know we have a lot of questions to answer, and we hope we'll hear others from you and any complaints as well.
Thank you so much. That was absolutely brilliant. A real pleasure to hear it, and very exciting to hear you talk more about our Art Night Commission. I'm going to go straight in. So the questions tonight have been sent to us by some of the partners that we're working with in those towns and cities that you just spoke about. The first one I'm going to ask you comes from the Tetley and their Panic Network, which is artists in Leeds, where the Tetley is based, working in partnership with Griselda Pollock, the amazing Griselda Pollock. The first question from them is, do you have upcoming projects that continue your work from Is It Even Worse in Europe at the Whitechapel Gallery in 2016 that reveal the understory, subtext and overlooked experiences of transgender, non-binary and gender non-conforming people who appear within collections?
Yes, we've been we've all been having to live through this whole COVID period. So our interventions in museums have been completely stymied the last couple of years, but we're hoping to get back to that. And what you suggest is a really good idea. When we did our project at Whitechapel, we asked museums to tell us about diversity in their own museum. And the results were pretty pathetic most of the time, because they would say they cared about it, but everything else they said showed they didn't at all. So we are hoping to do more of these interventions. We also did one in Cologne. We've done a bunch in various places, and some brave people inside the institution have invited and allowed us to really come in and stir everything up with our complaints about museums.
Oh, I can't hear you.
I was muted. Okay, the second one, also from the Tetley. How do you learn and support the sustainability of growth over time for an artist-led activist network, especially when run by, with, and for precarious artists in a hostile environment of austerity and corruption?
Boy, that's a hard one. We have this sort of mantra that says, do something. If it works, do it again. If it doesn't work, do it again anyway. Just keep chipping away. Patience is really important. And I know it's harder for some people than for others, depending on the circumstances of their lives. But we have just kept at it. It hasn't been perfect for everyone who's joined our group. Some have left, some have stayed, but we just kept at it. And every small success was super important and an encouragement for us to keep going. And when you think of it, it's one of our few ways in the art world to speak truth to power. If you participate in the art world, in the art market, you are in some ways drawn into the way things get done. And marginalized groups actually have that power because they have less to lose.
I mean, nicely answered. I'm going to move on to Glasgow Women's Library. Their questions come via the Consciously Rising group, which is a small group of women that the artist Helen Domain has been working with. So the questions from them are a little bit shorter than the questions from the telly. The first one is, why do men have bigger studios than women?
Well, this was a classic question decades ago with painters like Jackson Pollock and Lee Krasner. He had a big studio in their house and she had a room upstairs. So I mean, you know, women have not been encouraged to take the big space when they're in the same space with somebody else. Maybe that's part of it, but I don't think there's one answer.
Yeah, I'm sure there's lots of reasons.
Size doesn't matter. Size doesn't matter anyway.
Okay, moving on. I mean, yeah, I feel like we could talk about that one for a long time because there's so many questions within that question. The second one from the Glasgow Women's Library is, why are there more women taking up art practice in later life than men?
Well, that one's easy. It's called CHILDREN. You know, until recently, it was really hard to do both things, and it still is hard. So once the kids get older, you can go back and do what you were doing, because most women work at some kind of outside job. You know, there aren't that many artists who make a living when you really count up the numbers. So you're working, you have small kids, pretty hard to do both of those things and do art. Once they go to school, a lot easier.
I have another reason. I think women in general are more flexible and they're able to change course in their lives. They're able to change careers. I think there are statistics that have proved that it's very hard for men to change. And also, I think there's a less possibility of women being super successful. So they take up art for the love of it, for the want and the personal need and the and the satisfaction of making art, which actually is very admirable.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for those, Glasgow Women's Library. Okay, so moving on to Towner in Eastbourne, their billboard's incredible, looking out onto the sea. Their question comes from Olivia Foskett, who responded to an Instagram story. Everyone had interesting ways of finding these questions for us tonight. And the question from her is, how far has our society come in recent decades? In what ways are our problems worse than ever?
I mean, to generalize about everything is not really productive, but it's a great question because things are always worse than ever. And we're at a very horrible time right now in terms of human rights, violence, war, of course, sexual abuse, sexual slavery, trafficking, all of that. It's a very, very dire time. And I always think about it kind of coming in from left field because it is a horrible time. The world has always been horrible. It's not getting better, and it's very demoralizing. On the other hand, individuals can still use their creativity to do something about it. And that's what we try to do, whether it works or not. It's really hard to push that rock up the hill, but you have to try. And if you look particularly at demonstrations today, online today, you see incredible, effective activist art. So anybody out there who is doing this kind of art, thank you so much. We need you. And anybody who isn't, we have some strategies that can help you give it a try. And we really, really recommend it. We have to little bit by bit, make things better every way we can. And art is one of those ways.
Yep. Yeah, that feels quite exciting when you talk about it like that. Okay, we're moving to Wales, Glyn Vivian Art Gallery in Swansea. They have two questions. One of them comes from their young people's groups. So Rhiannon would like to ask And this is a really good question, actually. I'm interested also. Who are your inspirations?
Oh, you'd have to ask each one of us that. There, you would have a different answer from each one of us. I'm particularly excited by stand-up comedy and political humor in history, political art in history, because I was educated to think that formalism was the top of the heap, and that the political art was really somehow secondary. And when you start to examine the history of art, you realize that it's always been political. And so I love to read things that break the canon and that give us some new information. I think art history needs to be a detective game where we solve unknown mysteries and we discover new things. And I like to think about art as being a complex tapestry that gets more and more detailed and nuanced as you go on. And I hope that that's what comes of the male grays, that it doesn't turn into a vehicle for censoring art. That's not what we're intending here. It should take us deeper into the meaning of art in our culture by understanding the lives of male artists.
Do you want to add anything, Katya, to that? To the who are your inspirations?
We have a rule that we don't really talk about individual inspirations, but what Frida said was great. We all have them, and we all have them both in the world of art, literature, film, etc., and also outside. I mean, there's so many people, activists, doing things and have done things that have hugely changed how people think about things and pushed forward the notion of full equality in the world.
Yeah, great. Okay, so the next question from Glen Vivian Art Gallery is from Richard, who is on the front of house team at the gallery. And he says, what are your goals, aims, and ambitions?
Well, I think just what we said, we hope that some of our work has changed the way people look at art. That's our aim, and that takes many different many different projects and different concepts and different ideas. But we really want to transform people's minds and stretch their thinking about the meaning of art, and also question the way it's presented to them. What annoys me that I would like to change is people go to museums thinking they need to appreciate, when in fact they should be places where disputation takes place, where discourse happens, where people have arguments over and debates over things, rather than just silently and passively accepting everything that they see.
Yep. No, absolutely. I mean, I think it's very much what your work has always done. And I think, the way that this project for Art Night talks to, the work on the wall behind you, the famous "Do you have to be naked to get into the Met" from 1989. I think for so many people, that really changed the way that they experience being in museums and galleries. Just that, being armed with even just one question when you go into a space like that. Shifting things a little bit, the next question is from Kim McAleese, who's the program director at Grand Union in Birmingham. And I think she's on holiday, so it's really nice. I think she sent this from a beach. And it says, with the rapid assimilation of the world into digital space, can you see strategies for how the Guerrilla Girls could occupy this space? And do you intend on expanding further into it?
We have expanded hugely into it. From the very beginning in the early 90s, we had one of the first, an early website at that time even. I mean, our thing is never, we always try to push the envelope and learn new things also. So we try to explore issues better, but we also try to get our work out there better. And the digital world has just been, it's been incredible for us, because we used to put a poster up on the street of New York, it would be torn down immediately, sometimes by angry people, sometimes our fans would just tear it down and take it. So hardly anyone ever saw it. But now, whatever we want to do, like this great project that Art Night has sponsored and supported, it can all be online. Everybody can see it. And that is just an incredible thing for us and our work. Now, the big picture, there are lots of pluses and minuses. And the spaces, it's a very good question about occupying the space, because the spaces keep changing. And we also know now how nefarious and inhumane those spaces can be. So it's something we all are keeping watch on. I'm sure all of you out there are doing that the same, and Art Night is doing that the same. But for now, it's been a great way for us to communicate with people all over the world.
Mm. Yeah, it's a complex territory, isn't it, the internet? But we've all definitely used it a lot more recently. Yeah. I think there's time for me to slip in a quick question of my own, which is really just one that dawned on me during your presentation. And I thought about it as well when I first saw the Mailbraze website, which is so brilliant. And you talked about this little section you've got for apologies. Do you think people will use that? And have you got experience of people using that in the past? Like actually coming forward and saying, yeah, I've done something wrong?
Well, no, we have, well, we actually, excuse me, if we do go back, we did get a couple of apologies from art critics. We did a poster early on saying these critics don't write enough about art. And I mean, it took so much reading time, and you know how tedious art criticism can be, figuring out what their statistics were. Well, as it turned out, many of the critics who had very bad records for writing about women and artists of color were critics of the left. And that was super embarrassing to them. And we got some apologies. Now, whether that influenced their future writing, who knows? We're not statisticians. It would be really interesting for someone to go back and look at that. But yes, we have gotten apologies. I realize that some of the apologies we are asking for on the site might be incriminating. So no one has to mention their names, but it would be really nice for them to apologize. And then we have to put it up to the public whether we will absolve them.
You know, we're also asking people to tell their stories. And I hope we do get apologies. And I hope we do get the stories, but that's something we always get. We get thousands of, emails, IG comments, snail mail, everything you can imagine with people telling their stories. And we also get very angry people, usually guys, and we also get apologies. So whether the website will work, that particular page of the website will work or not, you can all help us. Go write something up there. That would be great.
Yeah, please.
And we don't need names. We don't need names. We need stories.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I'm going to end the questions with one that talks about the future, which is from Dundee Contemporary Arts staff. And it's really just the kind of, what are you working, and you spoke about this a bit anyway, but what are you working on next? Where and how are you targeting your focus in the future?
I have to sleep for a couple of days and then maybe I'll have an idea.
We're doing a whole bunch of exhibitions that were postponed. So that's one thing. One thing we've been doing the last 15 years or so are lots of exhibitions all around the world. And it's become a really cool way for us to kind of look at the whole trajectory of our work and figure out new ways to show it, to be interactive with it. So that's always in our future. And then for particular projects, well, let's see. We've absolutely refused every NFT request we've gotten and plan to keep continuing to do that. So that's not in our future. And then we're always thinking about the issues and what can we do better. It's so wonderful to try to figure out some kind of activist project that that people can participate in, respond to, use as a model to do their own thing. You know, it's not easy doing that thing. It's not easy doing that kind of work. And if we could give people one or two tips, one is issues are huge. You got to narrow it down to a little bit of something you can handle and try to make some kind of project or protest or whatever video out of that. And try to think about somebody seeing it who doesn't even know about the issue before. So you can really capture their attention and get them to change their minds.
Actually, I do have a handle on this question now. I don't know whether your viewers are in the UK or the US, but in the US, the structure of museums and museum culture is quite different. We don't have public funding for the arts. Most of the museums are private, and they're run by boards of trustees who are billionaires, who sell addictive drugs, get rich from prisons, pollute the world with gold mines, doing all sorts of awful things. So, museum culture in the United States is really like a big poker game for billionaire art collectors. And being that a lot of them are super capitalists, they don't pay a living wage to their employees. They fight the unionization of employees. A lot of employees in American museums are paid barely minimum wage. But during the pandemic, they've been given, the employees who were laid off, and many of them not paid. I mean, the Museum of Modern Art actually canceled and fired a lot of its education department. And, it has an educational mission. That's why it has a nonprofit status. So it's just outrageous that they would do that. But then the director still makes his multi-million-dollar salary. But the pandemic has given these employees some time to think about their situation and to figure out ways to organize. So in the last year, a number of New York City museums, the Whitney Museum, the New Museum, they have been unionized, which is an incredible advance.
Yeah.
And there have been continual and relentless protests against the boards of trustees. And there's an organization called Decolonize This Place that has taken upon itself to do continual protests to bring to light the nefarious backgrounds of museum trustees. And they were effective in getting a couple of people off the board of the Whitney Museum, and now they're focusing on Leon Black. And of course, we've been aware of Leon Black, his sort of deeply mysterious background since 2019. So I'm hoping that museums will be able to begin reinventing themselves, to really represent the culture that they're supposed to preserve, and not serve the billionaire art collectors who fund them.
I mean, what an amazing way to end this event, I think. Yeah, I mean, you're doing such great work in this, and there's a lot of people doing very good work in the UK around similar questions at the moment too, and a real call to unionize and to find the correct unions for art workers. So I think it's hopefully something that we can all continue talking about, because I feel like with this project, it doesn't end here. There's so many questions we still have to answer. So is there anything that you two would like to say before we end?
I just want to thank everyone for having the patience to listen to us in these crazy masks. And please don't forget the male grays, and please send your comments and your responses. That's what it's all about. And thanks again. Kata?
I just want to say to all of you and all of the incredible people we've worked with at Art Night, and all of the people who've responded to a lot of the stuff that we've been doing and are here tonight. We just wish you all the best. Make trouble and give them hell.
Brilliant. I mean, thank you. I'm just gonna, I feel like I would rather have ended with you both, but I want to just say a couple of words. Mainly thank you to both of you and to the Guerrilla Girls more widely for being just so incredible to work with. We've absolutely loved it. And like I said earlier, your patience and ideas and adaptability has just been wonderful to experience and to be part of this project. So thank you, and thanks to everybody who's attended for spending some of your Saturday with us. The billboards can be seen across the United Kingdom until the 18th of July. And then of course the website, the Male Greys, is ongoing. And like you both said, please have a look, upload your findings if you haven't already. Art Night continues with online commissions and in-person events until the 18th of July. So please have a look at the website, which is artnight.london, to find out more. And thank you to everybody, but especially to the mighty Guerrilla Girls. Thank you.